Ladies and gentlemen, today we'll be talking about chapters 17 and 18 of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. As we move into 17, the monster has finished his narration. All the events, starting with his creation up until his arrival in Geneva and the murder of William. And we remember that the monster began this narration. He talked about in chapter 10 that he was going to tell Victor his story, and then the monster was going to make a request to Victor. He wants something from Victor. And here we get that very quickly in chapter 17. As the monster begins his narration, he says to Victor, "You must create a female for me with whom I can live in the interchange of those sympathies necessary for my being." So the monster makes his request. "You created me. I am lonely, wretched, alone. This is your fault, Victor. And the only way you can make this right is to make me a wife, the bride of Frankenstein," as he asks. "You must make me a female monster so that we can." And the monster in this chapter, he's like, if you do this, she and I will head off to South America. We'll live in the jungles. We'll never bother anyone again. You'll never have to hear from me again. And Victor's left in a very difficult position here. Initially he does refuse. After here, you got to imagine Victor just heard that the monster killed his brother. He's not exactly in the mood to make another one of these monsters. And for Victor, he has to be worried about a number of things. If he does create the second monster, he doesn't know how to kill the first. If he creates a second, doesn't he just double his problems? What if he creates the second monster and she doesn't like the first monster? And now all of a sudden you have two ticked off monsters. That could be a problem. What if he creates the second monster and she teams with the first and they continue to attack his family? What if they create a race of beings that little baby monsters that eventually take over the world? There's so many reasons why Victor should not do this. But then, of course, Victor also has reasons to do it. Victor, in chapter 17, is this interesting conversation between the monster and Victor, where the monster lays out some powerful arguments. He does talk about reasons why Victor owes him this. He does, throughout the text, he reasons with Victor. And Victor goes back and forth. The monster makes some pretty powerful arguments. Victor does understand that he probably owes this to the monster, but he also is afraid of the monster. If I don't do this, the monster just told me he killed William. Will he not go after the rest of my family? Will he not go after Elizabeth, my father, Ernest, all the others? And so, Victor is obviously left in a very difficult situation here. I do want to remind you how ironic it is, when Victor's sitting here worried that the monster might destroy the rest of his family, to remember why the Victor began this in the first place. Victor's experiments in chapter 4 were all about, if I can create life, can I not then also prevent the death of his family? It's extremely ironic to think that Victor began this whole thing hoping to protect his family from death. And now the results of it, he is worried will go and kill the rest of his family. And so eventually in this chapter, Victor does consent. He's like, I will do it. I will create the second monster. He does consent to the monster's demands, which brings us to chapter 18. In chapter 18, Victor's now got to make the arrangements. He's living with his family now. He's not alone in Germany. It's going to be kind of a hard thing to do to, create this second monster. And so he comes up in chapter 18. Victor's father notices how unhappy Victor is. And Victor's father comes up to, Alphonse comes up to Victor. He's like, look, I've always looked forward to your marriage with dear Elizabeth. You were attached to each other from your earliest infancy. You studied together. You appeared in dispositions and tastes entirely suited to one another. But so blind is the experience of man that what I conceived to be the best assistance in my plan may have entirely destroyed it. You perhaps regard her as a sister. His father's like, Victor, I notice how upset you are. Is it possible that you don't want to marry Elizabeth? Is it possible that you see her as a sister? You were raised as brother and sister. Without any wish that she may become your wife? Nay, have you met with another that you may love? Alphonse comes to Victor. He's like, dude, are you upset? Are you, you're isolating away from the family. You don't talk to anyone. You don't talk to Elizabeth. Is it possible that you don't want to marry her? We could arrange that. You don't have to marry her. Alphonse, obviously, no one understands why Victor's isolating himself. He's obviously worried about the second monster. And and Victor reassures his father, he's like, no, 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 listen, I love my cousin tenderly. I love Elizabeth. I do want to marry her. Um, and Alphonse follows it up. He's like, well, look, Victor, if you do want to marry her, let's do it now. Let's get married. Let's get the two of you married. Maybe that, everyone is sad. You're obviously sad. Everyone's still lamenting over the loss of William and the execution of Justine. Perhaps, if you decide to do this, if you decide to marry her, this will cheer everyone up. Um, and Victor listens to this plan, Alphonse wanting to move the wedding up and just get the two married, and Victor can't do it. He's like, could I enter into the festival with this deadly weight hanging yet around my neck? There's an allusion to Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. Victor's like, I couldn't possibly marry Elizabeth with this monster thing still on the back burner. Like, I just can't do it. He's got to take care of the monster first and then move on with his life. And so he tells his father, so basically in this chapter, he comes with this plan. He's like, Dad, I do want to marry Elizabeth. I will marry Elizabeth. But first, I want to go on what could best be described as an academic tour. He's going to leave the family. He's going to travel to London and all these different places. He wants to travel and he wants to go on this academic tour like for a year. He's going to take Henry with him. And he's going to go visit colleges and talk to professors. It's this kind of like weird bachelor thing. Now, before I can settle down and start a family, I want to go and travel a little bit. I want to meet all these great professors, go to these universities, watch experiments. He passes it off as something he and Henry would do, like a road trip before he settles down to get married. But what he's really doing here, he's going to go visit these universities so he can collect the instruments he needs, so that he can meet the people he needs to talk to, and he can now begin his second monster. Again, he fully intends on creating the second monster so that he can get the first monster off his back. And so he does so. And so he does go on this journey. And even as he goes on this journey throughout, he's worried always, and where does he now exist? Is this gentle and lovely being lost forever? Victor's always concerned as he goes on this journey, is the monster following him? And so Victor is going to leave for about a year and a half with Henry to go on this journey to visit universities, under the pretense of, and he of course is going to excuse himself from Henry, send Henry off to go to parties and meet with people, but Victor himself is going to isolate himself and use this time to collect the instruments so that he can build his second monster. And only then, once he's satisfied the first monster, can he go back and continue his life as planned. And that's really all I have for 17 and 18. It's pretty straightforward with Victor putting together his plans and arranging to head off to create his second monster. I hope this finds you well.